Hello everybody, hope you all are doing fine. This is a video that goes over some of the very basic Java application constructs. It talks about some data types and it will also introduce you with some of the basic decision constructs. So let's go ahead and get started. So these are my objectives, that we would look into some simple Java applications, talk about some of the simple output input statements, give you little tips on how to write or how to use some of the good or best practices, look into some primitive data types, memory concepts, and also look into some of the arithmetic operators. So let's start with a simple program. The book is written using the convention that anytime you come across these blue fonts, they're basically telling you that they are keywords or reserved words in Java. So public means this class is going to be available or viewable by any other classes. Class is the keyword that gets associated with any time you write a new class. Welcome one is the name of the class that you have defined. Now Java is case sensitive, so if you define your welcome one with a big W, you have to save your file exactly the same way with the same capitalized W, otherwise you're going to get an error. You would start off with a open curly brace and would end with an open curly brace. These are all in pairs, and if you are missing any of the paired braces, you're going to get an error. The next line again, public static void. Public static basically means you don't have to define a new object to run this, and we'll talk about static later on. Void is telling you that this is not going to return any value, and then main is the name of the method. Within the argument of the parenthesis, you have string, so you are passing one argument. Next line, line number 7, is telling you that this is the way Java would let the users display things on the output screen. So system.out.println. Println is the name of the method. Out is the object that you created. System is the class. They're all separated by the dot format. Within parentheses, you are going to pass a string that you want to be printed out. So welcome to Java programming. And then you would close off your main method and close off your class. So then, since you're using this println statement, this is what you're going to see as an output. I've already talked about some of the formatting, some of the convention that we would use. Anytime you see something written in green, that's your comment. This one also is showing how you can write your comments. You should always write your name and your date on the programs or applications that you are creating. Already talked about this just a little bit. Java has some rules in naming its classes, and it tells you that you cannot use a digit, or the class name cannot use any spaces. Otherwise everything is good. They are case sensitive, so make sure if you write something in uppercase, you have to keep continuing writing that in uppercase. We already talked about the left and the right brace. It's important that you close it off or pair it correctly, otherwise you're going to get an error. Camel case, this is how you would write meaningful names of class or your variable, and you would start off with a big letter, and then the next word is going to be starting off with another big letter, and this kind of casing is called camel casing. It's a good practice to open and close your braces, and when we go into writing some real programs, you will see how you can use some good practices to make sure that your braces are always kept in pairs and properly closed. It's easy to read a program when you use white spaces, which is basically indentations, to make it more readable. Here is an example of how you can run your program from the command line. So if you have named your file or your class as welcome1.java, then you have to go to that particular directory and then run your file. So you would write a command. To compile the file, and the command is going to be javac. Javac and the name of the file .java. If you compile at that point, if you do not have any error, you should be generating some .class file with the same name as your file name, and then you would use the java command, java and the name of the file, to run your program. Here is the command. So this is showing you that this is basically the folder structure, but javac or javac, name of the file.java, this is the command to compile. And then once it compiles without any error, this is the line to run the program. So this time you're going to say Java, not with a C, and then only the name of the class file that was generated out of the welcome1. And then you should see the output right here. Let's take a look at another example. Here, the difference between the previous one and this one is the way you are writing your print and the print line. To make it very simple, basically line, this ln gives you a new line. So when you say system out print, this one without an ln does not give you a new line. So that's why this welcome to is printed right here, but then there's not a new line. Even though you're writing the second line, system out print line, in the next line, line number 8, when you're outputting, there is no new line created unless you use your ln. So now welcome to Java programming is all coming up in one line, but then since you have an ln, you have a new line right afterwards right here. You're going to see that Java would allow you to use backlashes as an escape character, /n as a new line, and there is a little table later on that will show you all that stuff. The next thing you're doing again is showing the use of this new line characters. So by saying system out print line, you're saying welcome /n. That's why after welcome you have a new line, takes you to the next line. Then you have 2 right here, and then have another new line, Java, another new line, programming. And of course, since it's an ln, you also have some new line at the end. Here is a table I was referring to earlier, /n/t/r gives you new lines, horizontal tabs, and things like that. Apart from the system out print line, you can also use the printf method if you want to have your data formatted. So let's take a look at some examples. So here I'm using a printf to print out, but look at this argument list. So %s tells you that now we are going to be printing a string in its place. So this is also called a placeholder. So %s, %n is going to give you a new line. Okay, so the first one, welcome to, is my first string. That's why I'm saying a placeholder. And then I'm putting an n. So that's why after welcome to, I move to the next line because you have an n. And then the next string is your Java programming. So that's why you see Java programming. So that's how also you can write your output statement. Whenever you are using multiple argument list, you are going to be separating that with commas. If you use multiple argument or multiple parameter, you're always using a comma to separate them out. Next, we will look into some of the data types. So let's look into the very basic integer. So here is a simple program where I write my first class called addition. Again, public class. But before I do that, I also use an import statement. What import does is bring in additional API or additional library into this class. So now with this statement, I could access everything that I have in the scanner class. So let's take a look. Public class addition, open curly braces, ending curly braces. Then I have my main method. Every Java application that you want to compile and run has to have the main method. This is where the program would always start. Okay. Anytime you have an application which does not have a main method, cannot be run because it does not know where to start. So public static void main, again opening of your main method body. Input is the object that I create out of my scanner class. So, and I have already brought in my import of my scanner. So input is the object I create, and this is just a variable name of the object. I can name it input, I can name it I can name it in, whatever I want to name it here is fine with me. However, I have to make sure I'm using the scanner because this is the class, and then I use a new keyword always to create a new object. So set scanner input equals new scanner, and then in my parenthesis I use system.in. Now make yourself familiar with this, because anytime you would want to create an interactive program, you would have to bring in a scanner, and then you have to use and create an object for you to input any values from the keyboard. Line number 11, system out print, enter first integer. Basically on your screen it gives you the message to the user, enter the first integer. Then you do this defining and initialization in all in one line. So it says int number 1. So number 1 is an integer variable, or also called a memory space that you named as number 1. And number 1 is just a variable name. You can call it anything. You can call it n, you can call it number, you can call it first number, whatever you want, you can call or name your variable. Equals, and you always go to the right, from the right to the left. So next int is the name of the method that would allow you to take an integer value. Okay, so if I want to take in a double value, I'm going to use a method name called next double. Okay, and these are all in the library. So at this point, if you look at the very last line, this is where you are storing the value that you have added from number 1 and number 2 into this variable called sum. It's also an integer, and with the printf statement you are defining or you are printing the sum out. So sum is %d stands for the integer, and n gives you the next line. So if I go to the next page, the output looks something like this. Enter the first integer 45, second integer 72, and sum is 117. Now you can take this program as a template and then change around and rewrite the program to do other arithmetics like minus or subtraction, multiplication, division, or any other form of arithmetic operator. Let's continue on, and we'll talk about classes which are grouped into packages or Java class library. And we saw a little bit of an import statement in the previous program, and that's where your import statement is going to allow you to bring in that API. Every time you see an import statement, that is pretty much the first statement at the beginning of the class, because without that you would not be able to utilize some of the features, some of the methods or the objects that you are using in that class. So this is the one that I was referring to you earlier. This is your input, and this is how you would define your input object. This is your scanner class, and you can go ahead and go through it, read through it. When you define your variable, this is basically what you use. So next int is the method that you use to take in an integer value. This is your arithmetic, also sometimes referred to as the expression, and this is your integer formatted output. So what I referred to you earlier about variables, you have to declare a name and then a type, the data type, and then a value that you want to store. So basically this is how it's showing you. So if this is the memory location, you're calling it number 1. You have to also define the number 1 as something that is going to hold an integer value. So you have to say int number 1, and this is going to let you store the value 45. So same thing over here. Number 2 allows you to store 72, and when you do a sum, you're going to store the value in this sum variable or sum memory value. So these are my arithmetic operators. Here is the list. Continuing on, this is basically showing you the procedure that you're going to follow, or the rules that you're going to follow when you have a combination of arithmetic characters, and you should be seeing or knowing about this from your basic math class. And let's now get into simple decision making, and we're going to use some if statements. So we're going to talk about condition, some of the selection, and then the equality operators and the relational operators. So here's a list, again something that you have seen in your earlier programming class. So equal, equal, not equal, this is how you're going to write this. So you can say x equal to y, x not equal to y. So these are my equality operators, and then the relational ones are greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to. Let's take a look at an example over here. I'm writing a class called comparison, and again, very same thing, very similar thing that you have seen before. Starting with an import statement, writing my class name called comparisons, writing my main method, creating my object called input, writing my first line for the user to input the next integer, take the value in with the next int, second integer, take the value in with the next int, and then I'm doing some conditional statements. So I'm saying if the value that I'm stored in number 1 is equal to the value that I stored in number 2, this is the print statement that I'm going to give. System out d, the value that I have seen there, is equal to the value that you're stored in number 2, and then basically give you the two numbers. If they're not equal, I'm going to say system out print f, it is not equal to, and then give out the two numbers. One is less than, one is greater than. This one is less than equal, this one is greater than equal. So here's the program. If you use the values, enter the first integer, if both the values are right, then this is what you're going to see. 1000, 2000, of course they are not going to be equal, so it's going to be not equal, less than, and less than equal. And this is, you're changing the values over here, and so these are the three things that is going to satisfy the condition. Very, very important. An if statement always begins with the if statement followed by the condition. If you have only one line like this over here, you may get away without having to have this curly brace, but it's a good programming practice to include the curly brace even if you have only one statement. But if you have more than one statement or a compound statement, then you have to use this curly bracket, beginning of curly bracket and end of curly bracket. What it tells you is this condition, if, and this condition is now going to associate with the multiple lines that are included within the curly brace. If you don't include it, it is only going to be attached to the first line right after the if condition. So this is what it's talking about, and this is their associativity, and that pretty much ends this chapter. Let's now look into some real programs and go over them.